Hey, this is Rayanne Painter.
This is Rachael Bayuk.
And this is Off the Record. Today we have a special guest.
My name's Alex Grant. I'm the managing editor for The Rayanne.
And today we're going to start off with the topic of coming out. So Rachel, what do you think you have to say about that?
Yeah, so coming out, it's not always the same for everyone. And I definitely, before I even get into it, I want to make sure that everyone, at least hears first that you don't have to come out if you don't want to. Like, nobody can force you to come out. It's definitely your business. Your sexuality is your prerogative. And if you don't want to tell anybody about it, you don't ever feel pressure to. I know that, you can see a lot of, the pride parades and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes, they have coming out day, that you can feel that overwhelming pressure that you need to tell people, but you don't. Sometimes you're not in a situation that's either safe or it's a good idea to come out. You need to assess your personal safety, your personal, how you feel about it. And at the end of the day, your sexuality is yours and everyone owns it in a different way.
Yeah, I think you're completely valid no matter what you identify as. And your sexuality is yours to distinguish and yours to do whatever you want with. And it's nobody else's business but your own.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree. I mean, I know we're all agreeing here, but I think that, just like anything in life, I mean, I know that's coming out as a big deal, but anything in life, it's your choice to choose what you share with the public and with your friends and family. And if you want to be an independent person and just keep that all to yourself, then all power to you,
I learned this from one of my professors. I won't name her just because she's not here, but she identifies as a queer woman, and she kind of also calls herself the biggest queer around. So she was telling me this story once of how this girl came out to her, and she was so scared to do it, and it was such a big deal to her, and she was like, why are you so afraid of saying this to me of all people? And then she realized that just because somebody is coming out to you, if you're accepting, doesn't mean that it's not the biggest deal in the world to them. And I think that's something to remember. It could be huge for somebody saying it just for the first time ever, no matter if you're the most accepting person in the world.
Yeah, totally. And I think no matter what the extent is, or how much you consider, how gay you consider yourself, or bisexual, or whatever you're coming out as, it's always valid, and I was in drama in high school, and there was this one guy who came out to a small group of friends, including myself, that he was 30% gay, and that might sound kind of unusual to some people, but he was in tears, and he was totally emotional, and it was a big deal to him. And we didn't know at the time that he was like that, but we were totally accepting of it, and we just said, we're always here for you. And I think that's the best advice I can give anyone, is just be, a good friend and a good, decent person, and just be there for people when they go through that, emotional time.
Yeah, and I think playing off that, it's really important to remember that just because somebody felt comfortable telling you doesn't mean they want everyone else to know. And so I know that I had a friend, at first she was just a girl I knew, that we went to middle school and then we went to high school together, and she was outed, and it was a big deal for her, and people bullied her tremendously. And I mean, I know just from seeing it from the outside that it first off, it was cruel and it was traumatic, and it was nobody's business, what her sexuality was, especially, we grew up in kind of a rural area, and so, it has those more conservative religious values, and I know that it was hard for her. She always put on a brave face, but it's something to remember, that it's not your job or your business to tell other people someone else's, especially for something that can be so dangerous for people. Sometimes they haven't told their families, and their family might have a really bad reaction that would affect them for years to come, and it's not your place to say anything.
Also, outing people in general against their consent is really dangerous. I know that so even if they look like a stereotypical, I guess, queer person or gay person, it doesn't give you the right to assume and out them to people. I know a personal story of mine is, so in my room, I have a very large pride flag, like in the middle of my room, very obvious. We had people over one night, and there's a few people I didn't know as well. They were like my friends' friends, and he saw it, and he was like, so you're gay, right? And to me, like, I don't know this person well enough to, like, come out to them right there, right then. So, yeah, just, like, if you're making assumptions, just, like, know that the person might be uncomfortable with it, even if, like, they're out and proud or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
Because that could turn into a very dangerous situation for them if, like, because they don't know.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that's not anyone's place to put you in that position or anyone in that position. And just one last thing I want to add is I think my personal belief is that gayness and straightness is on a spectrum, and even like the most straight person probably has had some gay thoughts. I mean, you can't assume that, obviously, but I consider myself a heterosexual, but I do believe that I'm somewhat on the gay spectrum, just because I think it's natural to think those thoughts. And you see in the wild that some animals have gay sex and stuff, and it's totally natural, even if some people don't want to believe that. I firmly believe that it's natural to have those thoughts. So just wanted to add that.
So going off what Ray said about stereotypes, another one is that men who like their nipples aroused or like stimulation, that they're like gay or are having gay tendencies, even if they're heterosexual. So what do you guys think about that?
I have a hard time conceptualizing like what exactly about a nipple being aroused is exactly feminine, but I guess that goes back to like boobs are like highly sexualized, so that's like very much related to being like a woman and having like a female body. So I guess that stereotype does make sense on that level. Doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah, definitely isn't. What do you think?
So personally, I don't always like my nipples to be licked because I'm just a very ticklish person. Although if it's done right, it can be enjoyable. I think it is very person to person, case to case. But as far as like as a grand scheme topic, generalizing all men, that stereotype at least, I think that it often is seen as an uncomfortable topic for men to discuss among each other, or even with close female friends or their significant others, because they're just not used to bringing that topic up in daily conversation. And I'm not saying like all sexual things are brought up daily, but I hear a lot of guys talking about what they would do with women and things like that, and they don't talk about their own like body and what they like to other guys. So I feel like a lot of the times they assume it's a gay thought just because of like social conditioning and instinctual things. That's just my take.
Yeah, and kind of playing off that, like having desires and sexual fantasies is not a feminine thing. Like, I mean, you can say as much as you want that, oh, I've never had a thought about anything. I bet you have. I don't know you, but I would be willing to bet that, we're all human and we all have those like times when we're like, I wonder what that would be like. And, and that's something that you can discuss with your partner. And if it's something that you're like, I don't know, I've never had it done to me, let's try, and if you're with somebody that you trust and you feel comfortable with, that should be, an easy conversation. But just make sure that you have the conversation before you try something new, because like consent is so important. Oh, yeah. And just because you're like, hell yeah, that sounds like a great idea, doesn't mean they're on the same page as you. Mm-hmm. So as far as with anything, you have to make sure that it's been a conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that it can be a pretty fun conversation, to really discover what your partner wants and what you want and how you guys can make that work.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And I totally want to echo Ray's point about female breasts are so hypersexualized, and we go back to like, free the nipple, that kind of movement. And it's just such a double standard, because boobs are just to feed babies at the end of the day. And I mean, obviously that's not the only purpose, but that's like the bodily function. So I don't understand, other than social conditioning, why it's so hypersexualized. But that's just,
I guess men just like don't think about their nipples as often. I don't think that they could be like a sexual tool, because like in society, men's nipples are not sexualized in the slightest. Like they're plastered all over billboards, they're all over Instagram, and here I am like trying to post a titty pic on Instagram and it's getting taken down in like 2 seconds. But
yeah, total double standard. Yeah,
and I know that, you know, there is that whole like, I think that men just, like what you said, just actually don't think about it. You know, you take off your shirt, you go run out and onto the beach, and you never think about like my nipples. And of course, like everyone has those things that they're self-conscious about, so maybe it is something that you slightly think about, but it's not the same thing. Like where if a woman like on the red carpet like has a nip slip, oh my god, the media freaks out, and then she's never going to like live down those photos. But why? You know, like why is it that things are so crazy for us, and then you guys, you know, or like some men don't even want to like have them touch? Like it seems confusing.
Why are women always thinking about like the location of their nipples at all times?
Yeah.
In all circumstances.
Yeah.
No, yeah, totally. And I think, you know, it's one of those things, it all goes back to like self-awareness and just being aware of your own body and what you want to choose to do with it. And, you know, I think more guys should try to think about their nipples and whether they want them to be licked or not. And even though it's not something that's talked about a lot, maybe bring it up with your significant other and see if you want to try it out, you know.
And for our final topic, we will be addressing meninism, which, if any of you don't know what this is, it's basically like an anti-feminist movement, and it's an exact like response to feminism in general. And I guess like the first time I heard about it was on Twitter, where I saw a feminist account basically just like bashing feminists and anybody who believes in feminism. And their concern with this is that I guess men's rights and men's like issues like aren't being addressed in society as often as women's are. But why do you think that is?
Well, I think that what it is that, in my opinion, in a society that's been about one type of person forever, all of a sudden when no one's talking about them anymore, when it's not like a big issue, then like people have the tendency to be like, hey, wait, what about me? You know, it's the same thing that kind of, well, not the same thing, but similar to like with the civil rights movement, when all of a sudden, you know, like a lot of white Americans, especially in the South, were like, hey, I'm important too. Let's not forget about all the horrible things that have happened to me because of this movement, you know? And so I think it's a reflection on, like, we need to keep in mind that just because we're talking about, you know, our issues or things that are including us doesn't mean that you aren't valid or that things aren't happening in your life. It just means that ours warrants a movement and yours doesn't.
Yeah, and I as someone who identifies as a male, I would have to totally agree that, you know, while men and women and transsexuals and all genders and sexualities, you know, deal with a lot of issues in various different ways, it's clear that, you know, male issues on a societal level are way lower than female issues on a societal level. And that doesn't, you know, if you're a male who's going through issues where, you know, women or men are attacking you because you're too feminine or something like that, you know, that's totally valid. We're not we're not saying that's invalid, but we're saying it doesn't warrant a whole movement where there are marches or whole Twitter battles against feminism, because you look at, you know, the founding fathers of our nation, I don't think there was a woman in that, you know, building. So when they're writing the Constitution, and that's our like word of law. So that's in itself is the issue, and the fact that we're founded and continue to be driven by a male dominated society is the main issue here, I think.
And I think also with other men and even some women saying like, oh, well, you act feminine and that's a problem. I think that just brings back to like more attacks on femininity and womanhood, and that it's so ingrained that that's something weaker, that's something not good, that like if like I know a lot of artists like, oh, well, he paints, he must be girly. Like what, have you ever taken an art history class in your life? Like so much of the conversation has been geared towards men, especially white men, and their perspective and how they've lived their life. And they always say that history is written by the winner, and I think that the problem is that people are realizing that they're no longer winning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And as a white male, I think that the issues doesn't start with women. It starts with white males, and it starts with all males, because it's about being self-aware and like realizing that sure, that was a nasty comment made by another guy or woman or whatever, but on the grand scheme of things, men don't have to go through the same struggles women do on a daily basis. Ray, did you have a segment you wanted to go on off of that?
Yeah, I just think that, so every, like, issue that's, like, in the feminist movement, that can go for violence against men or, just, like, how, like, I guess, like, toxic masculinity, and, the reason why I don't think, like, this, like, needs a specific movement is because all of these issues are perpetrated by men for men. And so I don't understand why this is like a anti-feminist movement, as if it's like women's problem that all of these things are happening, when it's literally like men against men perpetuating like these issues in society.
Mm-hmm.
Totally, yeah, totally.
And I think another thing is that, obviously, like our President Trump just kind of gave his own opinion on things, is that it's such a hard time, for men. It's just really, really tough out there for guys, and I think I'm sorry, I can't help but laugh, but it's not to say that you're, what you're going through just as a human being isn't valid. Of course it is, and every situation is different, but the kind of things that he's trying to say that is a problem, like, oh, men are, definitely just being falsely accused everywhere for all sorts of things. And then, like, it first off, it puts, this weird fear into men that are believing this, and that it's not, that's just, statistically, that's not what's happening. If you look at, numbers, it's more sexual assaults and, sexual harassment and all these kind of things are not being reported. It's far more likely that that's what's happening. And, we're starting to have a resurgence of where people are now feeling comfortable to talk about what's happened to them. And if that is threatening to you, you should assess yourself and maybe the things that you've done to people. And, and if you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to be worried about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you shouldn't be hiding for any reason. And, President Trump, when he talks to anyone, it's always going to be televised or recorded, generally speaking. Well, not always, but most of the time. And so when he says comments like that, if he's referring to a specific case, maybe, but as the president, you're talking on a grand scale, and it's just really concerning when you hear those topics, especially after the whole Kavanaugh confirmation and that whole issue, because what it does is it devalues what women are fighting for, and that's equality. And if Trump can't see that, then a lot of young men are going to be use that as a defense. Oh, President Trump says we're going through a tough time, your problems aren't valid. And that's the kind of toxic masculinity sort of messages that we don't need right now. We really need more support for all genders, but really right now we need to be supporting our females, because they're the ones who go through a day-to-day struggle more than any man, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Donald Trump, in saying that is direct violence against women and people who experience assault on all levels, because statistically survivors tell the truth, and the very small statistic that they're not telling the truth is so slim that not that it shouldn't be a thought in our minds, but it really, that should not be like the top issue, is that I'm being falsely accused, because we can't even convict people who are actually perpetrators to these crimes. So if you in your heart and mind have done nothing wrong to women or anybody, you should not be afraid, and you should support feminist movements, honestly.
Yeah, and the whole point of feminism is like about being inclusive and about, you know, fighting for equality and what's right for every single person, you know, on the face of this planet. In my opinion, that's the kind of feminism that I support, and that's the kind of feminism that I'm willing to fight for. And it's not an attack on men. It's really a critique. It's a statement that we deserve the same thing you do. You know, and I'm not, you know, going after men. I'm not like, oh, you know, I hate you. That's not what feminism is. You know, and if that's your idea of feminism, I would really appreciate it if you reevaluated it. If you even just did more research about like real people who are out here and fighting, and also keep in mind that there are trans individuals, and like identifying as a woman is just as equal as, you know, being born a woman, in my opinion. And then also like with meninism, like, you know, transgender males, like they are also having the male experience, and that's something that a lot of people seem to forget, is their struggles too. And so it's not just, it's about everyone. And, you know, and I would urge you to, you know, seek that out and think about it more, and not to think about everything that's happening as an attack against you, or like, oh, I got to think about myself. Like, obviously everyone for the most part thinks like, oh, I'm number one, you know, and at the end of the day, like, yes, you're number one, but the kind of things that are happening in the world more than likely aren't affecting you, and you need to be thinking about other people. And that's how we're going to, you know, be able to progress our society, progress our world into a better place that, you know, more people want to live in, that more people are comfortable in, and that it's a place that, you know, you would be proud to have your children grow up in, or that you would want to be. That's kind of what I'm fighting for anyways.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, I don't mean to plug my opinion piece, but I did write this week a letter to my fellow good men, with air quotes around good, because in my opinion, you know, any person, but men especially, has made mistakes, you know, and no one's like a perfect person ever. So what I encourage men, and the reason why I say men is because I identify as a male, what I encourage my fellow men to do is just think about it, you know, whether that's, you know, for an hour one day or weekly or daily. Just put some time to think about your own actions in the past and how you may have made women or a transgender person uncomfortable in the past. And I think that really helps you grow, you know, and sharing those sort of personal experiences can help you move on yourself, and also, you know, maybe help the people that you negatively impacted too. I would never recommend sharing people's names that are involved, unless, like other people that, you know, is not, unless you have their consent, of course. So in my piece, I do not name the female by name, because I haven't talked to her about sharing that story. But I think it's important to share personal stories where you think you were wrong, because that helps you realize that, hey, I need to be self-critical and self-aware.
Yeah, and I think I read your piece. It was actually, I think it's a very important topic, because I have never heard a man self-criticize himself in that way, because men don't want to think about it, and they don't want to think about like the lines of consent. And it's kind of what society has always taught them to do, is just to take, and not to think about the repercussions that they might be causing to other people. So I think you did a good thing.
Yeah, but there's always room for growth,
yeah,
right? You
exactly.
know, so.
And I think, just to kind of like close it out, something important, and I'll get your guys' opinion on it too, but just because you didn't, you know, physically attack someone doesn't mean that it was okay. You know, like making comments about somebody's body, or like just in general, like making somebody uncomfortable, like you need to be thinking about, you know, where you are in the world in relation to everyone else. And just because like like, if there's a girl you see on the street and you're like, you know, dang, I want to holler at that, maybe don't. And if you have something to say, like, you know, if you're trying to, you know, strike up a conversation with somebody, you don't know how to do it, and, you know, like, your macho go-to is always like, hey, pretty lady, maybe think about, like, you know, I actually really like her hair, or, like, think about what drew you to her that wasn't just her body, or, like, you know, that really low-cut top, or, like, whatever it is you're thinking about. Like, consider, like, oh, hi, like, your glasses are really cool. You know, like, strike up a conversation with somebody on, like, a more, like, real level, not just, like, on base human animalistic attraction, because that kind of stuff, it's not going to get you far in the first place, and it can make people really uncomfortable. And so even though you're not, like, outrightly assaulting somebody, there's still violence and there's still fear in your words.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. Go ahead.
Women are people too, as are everybody. Treat people as you would treat, like, somebody you really care about, you know? I guess when you're just speaking, just think about, like, how would a woman in my life perceive me as that? Like, would they call me in, like, a panic if I said this to them? Just being, like, really, really self-aware.
Yeah, and also, it's kind of a stereotype of, like, how would you feel if somebody did that to your mom, or, like, a girl you really care about, or even your girlfriend? Like, how would you feel if a guy, like, obviously if a guy comes up and he's like, oh, I like your glasses, that's not something that would make you be, like, upset. But if a guy is, like, walking past your girlfriend, your mom, your sister, whoever it is that's important in your life, you know, like, like, how would you take it? And then the other thing is that, like, it's almost sad that people have to, you know, put it in a way, because in my opinion, like, everyone is valid, like, whether you know them or not, and everyone is so important. And at the end of the day, like, you don't want to make anyone feel bad about something, and especially, like, something that's going to make them uncomfortable, something that's going to make them critical of themselves, like, oh, I shouldn't have worn this skirt, or I shouldn't have worn this outfit. Like, when you compliment somebody, like, oh, dang, baby, you're looking great, like, it's not a confidence boost that you might think it is. You know, like, because I do believe that there are people who, like, actually think that that's, like, oh, wow, like, I'm complimenting this girl, she must really like it. But more than likely she doesn't, and it's not something that you should be doing with somebody that you're not intimate with, or that you know, don't have that already kind of, like, consent in mind that they're okay with you speaking to them like that.
Yeah, totally. And just going back to, you were saying earlier, Rachel was saying, you know, oh, hollering at that, you know, and that's what it really is. When you're catcalling, you're not treating that person as a person, you're treating that person as an object. And you know, and I like to also, real quickly, I know we're trying to wrap up, but bring up, like, silent catcalling, which I don't know if that's a term, but maybe it's just a term I made up right now. But it's like, kind of like the conversation between men, you know, behind women's back, of, look at that, you know, look at that woman over there, you know, I'd do this to her, I would do that to her, and stuff like that. And that sort of conversation, you need, as fellow men, you need to stop that, because that only adds and contributes to the whole toxic, you know, view of women from the male's perspective. So once again, like, people are not objects, you know. Yeah,
we're not, you know, sexual devices that you're gonna go pick up from a store.
Yeah.
You know, that's not what we are, and we have our own desires, our own families, our own feelings, and you have to consider that every single person you walk past every day, no matter what their gender is, no matter what they identify as, has their own complex reality, and what you do to them, like, affects that. And it's something that I think people need to be more aware of. It's definitely something that, you know, we all, no matter what you identify as, need to be critiquing, you know, because there are issues that do affect men, and that there are definitely issues that affect women. And if, instead of being divisive, and instead of, you know, throwing salt across the lines, if we were really just got together and discussed the kind of things that are happening, I think that we would all be way better off. We would get our issues taken care of a lot faster if there weren't so many people who just want to, like, stigmatize or be like, oh, well, feminists are this, or feminists are this, or, like, you know, all that kind of stuff, and to just have, like, a real conversation. I think that that's so important. So this was Rachael Bayuk,
Rayanne Painter,
Alex Grant.
Thanks for listening to the Orions Off the Record.